Hey guys, it's Jen. Welcome back. So today's video is going to be another new palette dupes video. I did one last Friday and I got so many requests to keep doing them every Friday. I don't know if I'm going to be able to just because it depends on how many new palettes are coming out, but I guess at the rate that new makeup is coming out every week, I probably shouldn't lack for any content. So we'll see how it goes, but right now I do have 5 or 6 new palettes again that came out this week or are coming out very soon that I'm going to be able to try to dupe for you guys. The whole point of this video is really just to help you guys look through your collection, and maybe when you see a new palette coming out you can think, well, I already have something kind of similar, so I'll just work with that rather than spending the money on the new palette. With all the new makeup coming out, there's bound to be repeats, and I know in my case especially I tend to gravitate towards certain color stories and buy all the ones that come out that look like that, and then I get it home and I think, oh my gosh, I have something that looks exactly like this. But I did want to just mention quickly that in no way am I saying that these formulas are the same between any of these palettes. I really just wanted to show you guys palettes that have a similar vibe in case you're like limiting your spending or don't have the budget for new makeup right now. So anyway, why don't we go ahead and jump right in and get started. Okay, so first let's talk about the new Dominique Cosmetics Latte 2 palette. So I don't actually have this one, but I've heard very mixed reviews on it, which is kind of what kept me from purchasing it originally. So I'll go ahead and put it just up on the screen there so you can see what it looks like. And with this palette, I felt like it's a very neutral palette overall. There's just really 3 colors that are a little bit more unique, and the rest are neutrals that we probably have already like 10 times over in our collections. So you have that kind of mustardy yellow matte shade. You also have a mint green matte, and then more of a corally pink color. So when I was looking for dupes in my collection, I was really trying to look for ones that had those colors versus the neutrals, because I think those are the more unique colors in the palette. So the first one that I came up with is the Juvia's Place Deuce palette, and this one has 2 of the 3. You have the mint green matte shade, and then you also have that corally pink. Now this one doesn't have as many neutrals as the Dominique one does. It does have a dark brown in the upper right hand corner that looks very similar to the one in the Latte 2 palette. Also down in the bottom right hand corner you have that warm reddish brown, which also looks very similar to the one in the Latte palette. And then also on the bottom left hand corner you have a light tan, and the Juvia's Place also has a light ivory shade in the top row of the palette, but it's a shimmer shade versus the one in the Dominique palette is a matte, so that makes it a little bit different. The Deuce palette also has a hot magenta pink in the center as well as a shimmery gray in the bottom row, so there are definitely some differences between the two, but there's also a lot of similarity between them. The next one that I wanted to show you guys is the Too Faced Clover palette. So this one, at first glance, I wasn't thinking that they were really similar, but I was mainly looking at the greens in the palette and again those corally shades. So what I ended up doing instead is removing all the shades that are very different and just focusing on the ones that are a little bit closer in tone. So you do have the matte green in here. Granted, the one in the Clover palette is a slightly different tone. It's not really as minty of a green, it's a little bit more greenish, but you do have that mustardy yellow down in the bottom corner. You also have that pinky coral shade again. You do also have some neutrals that are similar. Not all of them, but again with this palette I felt like the green shade and the coral and the mustard yellow were the ones that were the most unique colors, and if you already have the Clover palette then you have very similar colors in your collection already. Not to mention there's also a really great dupe if you don't have the Clover palette. Check out the C Color Cosmetics Fairy Tale palette. I want to say it's like $7 or $8 or maybe it's $9. It's under 10, let's put it that way, and it is a fantastic dupe. The quality is amazing. And then the last dupe that I found for the Latte 2 palette in my own collection is the Profusion Festival palette. And this one again, when you first look at it, you're like, no, I mean, I saw the mint green right away, and that's what initially made me think that maybe it could be a dupe. But the rest of the palette looks very different. The Festival palette has so many different shades in it that again, it's kind of distracting to the eye. So I went ahead and just took out the colors that I felt were similar again, and I was actually very surprised that I was able to pull almost every shade that I needed to make the Latte 2 palette out of the Festival one. I would say the biggest difference is that pink shimmer shade that I pulled from the Profusion palette, because it really doesn't line up to the one in the Latte 2. That one is more of a champagne. It has a slightly pink tone from what I can tell in the pictures, but I couldn't find a shade like that in the Festival palette. So that's really the only one. I feel like everything else lines up pretty well. You have that mint green matte, you have the corally pink matte, you have the mustardy yellow matte shade, you have some pretty similar neutral tones in there as well, and I think Profusion's formula is awesome, especially for the price. This entire palette's like 13 bucks, and I think the quality is really good on it. So if you already have the Profusion palette, you may not need the Latte 2. Alright, so next up, let's talk about this Jaclyn Hill 2 palette from Morphe. So when this came out, I immediately thought of like 4 different palettes in my collection that looked really similar to it, because it's that typical like kind of sunset vibe palette with the oranges and the yellows and the purples, and I just felt like so many palettes came out like this very recently. So the first one I thought of immediately was the Colourpop It's All Good palette. This one I actually don't have in my collection. Why did I not buy this one? I don't know. I think I intended to, but for some reason I just never got around to it. But looking at these two side by side, I mean, they have so many similar shades, and Colourpop's formula, at least for me, is so much better than Morphe's that I think if you already have the It's All Good palette, you probably can go ahead and skip the Jaclyn Hill one. Another one that I thought of right away is the Natasha Denona Sunrise palette. This one again has those sunset or sunrise kind of vibes. Granted, the Natasha Denona one is not as large, so you don't get as many colors, but oftentimes when it comes to Morphe palettes, they're big, but a lot of the colors are very similar to each other and very close, so when you put them on the eyes, they don't really look all that different. So even though you might have a ton of colors in that Morphe palette, chances are your eye looks are going to include either some purple, some pink, some orange, or some yellow, or some combination of those colors, and you have all of those same colors in the Sunrise palette. So if you have the Sunrise palette already, again, it's probably not necessary to run right out and buy the Jaclyn Hill palette. Another very similar dupe I thought of is again from Profusion, and it's their Mirage palette. This one came out over the summer. Again, you have those same kind of tones with the oranges and the yellow and the purples and the pinks. The only thing I'll mention quickly though is that the Profusion one does have 2 pressed glitters in it, which I'm not crazy about. Granted, there's so many other colors in the palette, I just don't touch those for the most part, but if it's something that's important to you that you really want to avoid, then I would skip the Profusion one. And then one more dupe I have in my collection is the Carity Cosmetics Picante palette. This one, again, same type of color story. I got mine at CVS, and they are a little bit more on the expensive side for a drugstore palette. They're $28, but that's very much in line with the price of Morphe. Usually the Morphe palettes are around $25 or so, and I feel like Carity's formula blows Morphe out of the water again, at least in my opinion. I enjoy working with them so much more. They're not as powdery and dusty, and they seem to last longer on the eyes, at least for me. So aside from Colourpop's It's All Good, which I haven't tried, but I'm guessing the formula is good because I always love Colourpop, I would say the Carity one is definitely one that I would recommend as an alternative to the Jaclyn Hill palette. Alright, so moving right along, we have the Melt Cosmetics Millennial Pinks palette. So this one, I felt like I had a little bit of trouble in the beginning trying to think of dupes, but I think I came up with a couple that might look really similar. So the first one is the Charlotte Tilbury Starry Eyes to Hypnotize palette. So like a lot of the palettes you're going to see in this video, this is not an exact shade for shade dupe, but you do have at the end of the palette on the right hand side that deep navy blue matte shade, and you also have that kind of bluish silver shimmer shade that I thought was really interesting. And then also more towards the middle of the palette you have some of those similar pink shades that are in the Melt Cosmetics palette, but that's pretty much where the similarities between these two end, because the Charlotte Tilbury also has some of those olivey greens as well as some neutrals on the left hand side of the palette. So there are definitely some similarities and differences between these two. They're not exact dupes, but it really just depends on how close you need it to be and which shades you're actually the most interested in the Melt palette, and if the Charlotte Tilbury one has those similar shades, and of course if you own that one already. If you don't, then that's a different story. Another palette that I thought looked really similar to Millennial Pinks is the new Viseart Paris Edit palette. So this is another new one, but you may have already purchased this one, so if you do have it, you may not need to go out and buy the Melt one. I think it does have a lot of similar shades, especially where those pink tones are concerned. You also have that grayish steely blue shimmer down at the bottom left hand corner, which doesn't look exactly like the one in the Melt palette, but it's kind of hard to tell when you're just looking at photos versus seeing them in real life. But overall I feel like it has a very similar color story and similar vibe, and I feel like that happens a lot with palettes where everybody comes out with very similar color stories all at the same time, and especially I think because we're around Valentine's Day. Actually, it is Valentine's Day today. Happy Valentine's Day. But you know, I think everybody's coming out with these kind of more romantic, like pink and purple sort of themed palettes, so it's bound to happen. So then let's also take a look at it next to the Colourpop You Are a Cutie palette, because this one again has the very similar vibe with those pinks in there. You also have that grayish blue color, although with this palette I actually do own it, and that color does not come off the way it looks in the pan. It's a duochrome, so in some cases it actually looks a little bit more like pink and purple, and then in other light light it looks a little bit more blue, but it really doesn't look like it does in the pan. I'm guessing that the one in the Viseart palette does, so that one may be a little bit of a closer dupe to the Millennial Pinks than this one is, but I just wanted to show you this one really quick because again it has that sort of pink vibe to it. Alright, so moving on, the next palette I actually own, and I own the dupes, so I'll be able to show you guys side by sides and comparison swatches. So the first palette is the Charlotte Tilbury Darling palette. This one just came out very recently. I purchased it at Sephora. It's a little mini palette, but it's $57, so it's definitely not inexpensive. I think the formula is amazing on it, and it has these beautiful rosy warm tones. I'm actually wearing it on my eyes today, and I just think that it performs beautifully, and I love smaller palettes these days. But I was racking my brain trying to think of which palettes in my collection this looked like. And at first I was thinking about the Urban Decay Naked Petite Heat, but when I put them side by side, they actually look nothing alike because the Petite Heat has more of like an orange vibe to it, while this one is more rosy warm tones. So then I thought about the Tartelette Toasted palette, and that one was the same exact way. That one has, again, more of like the orange tones, while this one has more of like the reddish rosier tones. And then I thought, well, what about Naked Cherry? That one is a little bit too pink and red compared to this one. So then I realized all of a sudden which palette this was making me think of, and it's the Milani Pure Passion palette. These are so incredibly similar to each other. I'll go ahead and show you a side-by-side comparison. Just looking at the two side by side, I saw so many similarities, and when I swatched them together, a couple of the shades aren't exact, but I would say overall you're gonna get really the same looks with these two palettes. And even though I love the formula of the Charlotte Tilbury, I love the formula of the Milani one too. Even when I was swatching them, they both were like so smooth and so buttery and pigmented. The only thing is this palette is getting harder and harder to find because they're discontinuing these. I'm so sad about that. Why are you doing this? People are seeing them pop up at Marshall's and TJ Maxx, and they're on sale. Like on the Milani website, you can still get them if you hurry, but I'm guessing once they sell out, they're not coming back. I definitely need to buy a backup of this one and Soft and Sultry because they're my favorite. But anyway, just wanted to show you this really quick. If you have this Pure Passion palette, which I know a lot of you do, you don't necessarily need to run out and buy this one. All right, so then next up we have the new Too Faced Born This Way Natural Nudes palette. I just got this one this week, so I haven't really had a chance to try it out and play with it yet, but you're gonna see it in my Sunday haul, and I plan to try it before the weekend. So during that video, I'll be able to kind of give you guys a little bit of like a first impression and my thoughts on it. But when I got this home, I was thinking originally that it reminded me a lot of Soft Glam. So I'll go ahead and show it to you next to Soft Glam so that you can see how they compare. And I really do see so many similar shades between these two, and they're not exact dupes, but I feel like if you already own Soft Glam, you really probably already have most of the shades that you would need, and I think they're going to create some really similar looks on your eyes. Not to mention that at least in swatching this new Too Faced palette, I'm not super impressed with the shimmer shades. I felt like the Anastasia ones were so much smoother, and these are ultra metallic, so they have like almost like that flaky texture to them where they're not as smooth in a swatch. And I don't know how that's going to translate on the eyes yet, but I know that I do prefer smoother, more buttery eyeshadows, and these, like when I was swatching them, they just felt like a little bit chunky and not quite as held together as the ones in the Soft Glam palette. So I would say you may want to hold off on this, but certainly if you have Soft Glam, I don't think you need it. And then another one I thought was super similar is the Colourpop Bare Necessities palette. Again, if you have this one, I really don't think you need the Too Faced, so I'll show you them side by side. Granted, the Colourpop one is a lot larger. You have a lot more colors to play with in here, and I know some of you guys aren't a fan of larger palettes, but this one, for the price, the formula is so good. And again, when I swatched them together, I just felt like the Colourpop one was so much smoother. I think the mattes in the Too Faced one feel really nice. It's just the shimmer shades that are just a little bit more like metallic and chunky. And I do think, you know, on the eyes, they're probably going to give off that really beautiful, shiny, metallic foiled look. But it's just a matter of what kind of shades that you like to work with. So if you don't like more of the chunky, metallic, like almost glitter shades, then you may not really care for this one. All right, guys, so the last palette dupe that I have is for the new Jeffree Star Bloodlust palette. So again, I don't have this one. I'll just go ahead and put a picture of it right up on the screen for you guys. This one, I know there was so much disappointment. Everybody was expecting a deeper purple, like a more rich palette, and really it has a lot of pinks in it. It has some lighter purples, but then you also have some random pops of color. You have that bright orange, then you have like that almost chartreuse color green, and then you also have that deep teal matte at the bottom. You have a couple of grays on either side. So if this was just a purple and pink palette, I could think of a lot of different ones that it could look like, but those other pops of color were throwing me off because it is a pretty unique color story at the end of the day when you factor those in. But at the same time, I was actually able to find a couple that at least had one of those pops of color. So the first dupe that I found is from the brand IBY Cosmetics, and I thought that their Poolside palette looked really close as far as the color story goes. You have those pinks and purples. You also have that deep teal matte shade. Granted, this one doesn't have the bright pop of orange or that lighter green shimmer, but just looking at the two of them side by side, I just think that they have a really similar vibe. And on a side note, I've never tried IBY, but funny enough, I had gotten a Macy's gift card for Christmas, and I was on their site checking things out and seeing what was new and trying to spend my gift card, and I came across IBY on their site. I didn't even realize that Macy's carried them, and I saw this palette and actually have it sitting in my cart right now as one of the things that I wanted to try out. It does seem to have pretty good reviews across the board, and I was excited to see a new brand and maybe try some things from them. So if that's something you'd like to see here on my channel, definitely let me know down below. And then the next palette that I thought had some similar shades in it is actually from my own collection, and it's the Hot Hot Heat palette from LA Girl Cosmetics. And again, I'm not going to find an exact dupe just because of some of those like random colors that are in there, but this one has the pinks and purples, especially this pink right here looks just like one that's in the Jeffree palette. You also have the deep teal matte shade. You do have like more neutrals in this one, I feel like, but because it has those pinks and purples and the deep teal, this one stuck out to me a little bit. So I'll just show you a close-up of side by side of the two of them. So I did definitely notice some similarities between these two. Also, you have that matte like yellowish ivory that's in the top left-hand corner of the LA Girl palette. You also have that one down near the bottom of the Jeffree Star in the second to last row. So even though these two aren't super close, I figured I would mention it just because there are a few similar shades between them. And then the last one that I thought of was the Wanderlust palette from Profusion again. Profusion just, I think because they have so many palettes and so many color stories, it's easy to find dupes within them. But this one again, it's a way larger palette, so you have a lot of colors to pick from, but you do have these pinks and purples right here on this side of the palette. You also have this deep kind of bluish teal matte, this one right here. It's a little bit different. I feel like this one maybe leans a little bit more blue than the one in the Jeffree Star palette. You also, again, have this ivory shade that leans a little bit more yellow like the one in the Jeffree Star palette, so I'll show you the two of them side by side. And the one in the photo has square pans because Profusion has updated their palettes to have square pans instead of the round ones. I happen to have an older version of the palette, that's why it looks different. But oh, I also wanted to mention that the Profusion one, if you look all the way to the left-hand side in the center row, you have a green that looks really similar to that lighter shimmery green that's in the Jeffree Star palette. The only thing is you don't have the dark gray matte in this one. You also don't have the orange or the black one with the glitter. But other than that, there were quite a few shades that kind of lined up a little bit between the two, so I just wanted to show you guys this one as well. Alright guys, so that's everything that I have. I hope you enjoyed this video and found it helpful. If you did, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. Also, I'd love to hear your favorite palette dupes down in the description box below. If you've found any dupes for any of these new palettes, I would love to hear from you. Also, just in general, if there are any palettes you would like to see me dupe in the future, or just even older palettes maybe that you'd like to find dupes for, I could always do a video on that as well. I know I usually focus on newer ones in these videos, but if you'd like to see dupes of older palettes, definitely let me know down in the comments. I do have a playlist of all of my dupe videos, so I can leave that linked above because it's possible that maybe some of the ones that you're wondering about, I've already covered it, so I'll leave that one right up there for you guys. Thank you all so much for watching. Please don't forget to hit that subscribe button right here in the corner of the screen, and I'll see you all in my next video. Bye guys!